The cabin sat deep in the Montana wilderness, where cell towers couldn't reach, and the nearest neighbor was 40 miles of rough mountain road away. Jake Reaper Morrison rocked his 3-week-old son against his leather vest, the baby's cries echoing off log walls that still held the scent of his dead wife's perfume. The formula was running low, the generator needed fuel, and somewhere out there, the cartel soldiers who'd killed Sarah were still hunting for the flash drive she'd hidden before giving birth. Jake wasn't just any biker. He was former Special Forces, a man who'd traded his dog tags for club colors to infiltrate the trafficking ring that had murdered his sister. But now Sarah was gone, caught in the crossfire of his double life, and he was alone with an innocent child who deserved better than a father with blood on his hands and a target on his back. The knock at the door came at midnight, soft but insistent. Jake's hand moved to his. 45, his other arm tightening protectively around his son. Through the peephole, he saw a man in expensive clothes, lost and desperate. But in Jake's world, lost men often carried the deadliest secrets. What did this stranger really want? And how had he found this impossible-to-locate cabin? The stranger knocked again, 3 measured raps that seemed almost polite. Jake studied him through the reinforced glass, mid-40s, silver at his temples, wearing a wool coat that probably cost more than most people made in a month. Blood stained the man's left sleeve, and his designer shoes were caked with mud and pine needles. "Please," the man called out, his voice carrying the refined accent of money and education. "I know someone's in there. I need help." Jake's son had finally settled against his chest, tiny fist curled around the patch on his vest that read Nomad. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd been running for 3 weeks now, ever since Sarah died in that sterile hospital room, whispering coordinates with her final breath. The coordinates that led to this cabin. The coordinates she'd made him memorize but never explained. Jake kept the chain latched as he cracked the door open, barrel of the 45 visible in the gap. "How'd you find this place?" The stranger's eyes widened at the sight of the gun, then dropped to the baby carrier strapped to Jake's chest. Something flickered across his face, surprise, maybe recognition. "My car went off the road about 2 miles back. I saw your light through the trees. No road comes within 2 miles of here. The old logging trail. I was taking a shortcut." The man swayed slightly, pressing his injured arm against his side. "Look, I'm not looking for trouble. I just need to use a phone. No signal out here. Then a ride to town in the morning. I can pay you well." Jake studied the man's face in the porch light's yellow glow. Exhaustion lined his features, but there was something else underneath. A calculation that reminded Jake of the CIA handlers he'd worked with in Afghanistan. Men who smiled while they lied. "What's your name?" "David Chen. I'm a pharmaceutical consultant from Seattle." The answer came too quickly, too rehearsed. "I was driving to a meeting in Billings when the storm hit." There hadn't been any storm. The sky was crystal clear, stars sharp as broken glass against the black Montana sky. Jake's thumb traced the safety of his pistol. 3 weeks of paranoia had kept him and his son alive, and every instinct screamed that this man was wrong. But the baby needed formula, and Jake's supply would last maybe 2 more days. The nearest town was a dangerous ride on his Harley, impossible with an infant. "You're bleeding." Chen looked down at his sleeve as if noticing the blood for the first time. "Caught it on metal when I crawled out of the car. It's nothing serious." The baby stirred against Jake's chest, making soft mewling sounds that meant feeding time was approaching. In 90 minutes, those sounds would become screams that could be heard for miles in the thin mountain air. "Step back," Jake ordered, closing the door to remove the chain. He opened it again, gun still drawn but lowered. "Hands where I can see them." Chen raised both hands, wincing as the movement pulled at his injured arm. Jake caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something metallic, blood, but also something else. Gunpowder, maybe, or the sharp chemical smell of fear. "Thank you," Chen said, stepping into the cabin's warmth. His eyes swept the room with practiced efficiency, taking in the sparse furniture, the boarded windows, the emergency supplies stacked in military precision. "Quite a place you have here." "It's temporary." Jake backed toward the kitchen, keeping distance between them. The baby's breathing was warm against his neck, a reminder of everything he had to protect. "You can sleep on the couch. We'll figure out your car situation in the morning." Chen nodded, but his gaze had already found what Jake feared most: the framed photo on the mantel showing Sarah in her nurse's scrubs holding an ultrasound image. The same photo the cartel had posted on every dark web bounty board from Tijuana to Vancouver. The sound of gravel crunching under tires broke through Jake's exhausted haze at 3 in the morning. He'd finally gotten Emma to sleep after 2 hours of walking the cramped trailer, her tiny fists clenched against his chest as he swayed back and forth like a man drunk on desperation. The engine outside cut off with a mechanical sigh that seemed too loud in the desert stillness. Jake peered through the moth-eaten curtains, careful not to disturb the baby sleeping in the makeshift crib he'd fashioned from a dresser drawer. A black sedan sat in his driveway, its paint job reflecting the pale moonlight like dark water. Not a car he recognized, and definitely not something that belonged in this forgotten corner of Nevada, where rusted trailers squatted between Joshua trees like abandoned dreams. The driver's door opened, and a woman emerged, moving with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to navigating dangerous territories. Even in the dim light, Jake could see she was dressed too well for this neighborhood. Dark slacks, crisp white blouse, hair pulled back in a way that suggested authority. She glanced around the property with calculating eyes before walking toward his front door. Jake's hand instinctively moved to the .45, tucked behind the couch cushions, then stopped. Emma stirred in her sleep, making those soft baby sounds that still terrified him with their fragility. Whatever this woman wanted, he couldn't afford to make enemies, not with a 3-week-old daughter who depended on him for everything. The knock came soft but insistent. 3 measured raps that somehow conveyed both politeness and inevitability. Jake waited, hoping she'd give up and leave, but the knock repeated with the same patient persistence. He opened the door just wide enough to fill the frame with his shoulders, keeping his voice low. "It's late." The woman smiled, the kind of expression that never reached the eyes. "Mr. Morrison? I'm Sarah Chen with Child Protective Services." She held up an ID badge that caught the porch light. "I'm sorry for the unusual hour, but I received some concerning reports about the welfare of your infant daughter." Ice flooded Jake's veins. "Reports from who?" "I'm afraid I can't disclose that information. May I come in? I'd like to do a brief wellness check on the baby, just to ensure everything is satisfactory." Her tone was professional, almost gentle, but Jake caught the steel underneath. "You got a warrant?" Sarah's smile widened slightly. "This isn't a criminal investigation, Mr. Morrison. It's a welfare check. Of course, if you'd prefer to make this official—" She let the threat hang in the air between them like smoke. Emma's cry pierced the night from inside the trailer, sharp and demanding. Sarah's eyes shifted past Jake's shoulder toward the sound, and he saw something flicker across her features. Interest, perhaps, or satisfaction. "She's hungry," Jake said, not moving from the doorway. "Then perhaps we shouldn't keep her waiting." Sarah stepped forward just enough to suggest she wasn't asking permission anymore. Jake weighed his options in the space of Emma's escalating cries. Refusing entry would raise questions he couldn't afford to answer, the kind of questions that led to investigations, background checks, and eventually to a shallow grave in the desert that was supposed to stay buried forever. He stepped aside. Sarah walked into the trailer with the confidence of someone who'd done this before, her gaze cataloguing everything. The empty beer bottles on the counter, the pile of unwashed laundry, the general chaos of a man trying to hold his life together with duct tape and stubbornness. She moved toward Emma's cries with purpose. "When did you last feed her?" Sarah asked, leaning over the improvised crib. 2 hours ago. She's got colic or something." Jake hated how defensive he sounded, how this stranger's presence made him feel like a criminal in his own home. Sarah lifted Emma with practiced ease, and the baby's cries subsided almost immediately. Sometimes they just need a different touch, she said, cradling Emma against her shoulder. Babies are remarkably perceptive. They sense when their caregiver is stressed. The way she said stressed made Jake's skin crawl, like she knew something about the source of his stress, like she knew about the phone calls in the weeks before Lisa died, the hushed conversations about money owed and patience running thin, like she knew about Marcus DeLuca and the kind of man who didn't forget debts, even when they followed you across 3 states to a trailer park in the middle of nowhere. She seems healthy enough, Sarah continued, still holding Emma with unsettling familiarity. Though I notice you don't have many of the standard baby safety items. No proper crib, no car seat that I can see. Money's tight. I'm sure it is. Raising a child alone is never easy, especially when you're dealing with other complications. She met his eyes over Emma's head. I'd like to schedule a follow-up visit. Make sure you have everything you need. Jake nodded because he had no choice, watching this stranger hold his daughter like she belonged there. The baby's cries pierced the pre-dawn silence like a siren, jolting Marcus awake from the first real sleep he'd managed in 3 days. His body protested as he rolled out of bed, muscles stiff from exhaustion and grief. The small bassinet beside his bed held his daughter Emma, her tiny fists flailing as her face turned red with fury. "All right, sweetheart," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Daddy's here." His hands still trembled slightly as he lifted her, the weight of responsibility feeling heavier than any motorcycle he'd ever handled. 3 weeks since Sarah's death, and he still felt like he was drowning, grasping for any semblance of normal in a world that had been turned completely upside down. The kitchen felt foreign in the pale morning light. Formula preparation had become a ritual of precise measurements and careful testing, nothing like the easy confidence he'd once felt working on engines or navigating mountain roads. Emma's cries softened to whimpers as she latched onto the bottle, her dark eyes, Sarah's eyes, staring up at him with an intensity that made his chest tighten. A soft knock at the front door made him freeze. Nobody visited this early. Hell, nobody visited at all anymore. Most of his old crew had scattered after what happened, and the few remaining members of the Iron Wolves kept their distance. Marcus had made it clear he was out of the life, but some stains never completely washed clean. The knocking came again, more insistent. Emma stirred in his arms, sensing his tension. Marcus approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. A woman stood on his porch, maybe 45, with graying brown hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She wore a simple blue dress and carried a leather bag that looked professional. Nothing threatening about her appearance, but Marcus had learned long ago that appearances meant nothing. "Who is it?" he called through the door. "Mr. Cole? My name is Diana Walsh. I'm from Child Protective Services." The words hit him like a physical blow. Marcus's grip tightened protectively around Emma as his mind raced. How had they found out? Who had called them? He'd been careful, hadn't he? "I don't understand," he said, stalling for time. "What do you want?" "I'd like to speak with you about Emma's welfare. We received a call expressing concerns about a newborn being raised by a single father with certain lifestyle complications." Marcus felt the familiar rage building in his chest, the same fire that had gotten him in trouble so many times before. But Emma's weight in his arms anchored him, reminded him of what mattered now. He unlocked the door but kept the chain engaged, opening it just enough to see the woman's face. She looked tired but kind, with laugh lines around her eyes that seemed genuine. "Can I see some identification?" he asked. Diana Walsh held up her badge and state ID without complaint. "I know this is unexpected, Mr. Cole. I'm not here to take your daughter away. I just need to ensure she's in a safe, stable environment." Marcus studied her face, searching for deception. In his experience, government officials usually came with backup and attitudes. This woman seemed different, almost sympathetic. "It's not a good time," he said finally. "Emma just went to sleep. I can wait, or we can schedule something for later today." But Mr. Cole, I do need to complete this assessment. The sooner we can do this, the sooner I can close the file. Close the file. That sounded promising, but Marcus knew better than to trust easy promises. Still, refusing would only make things worse. And if someone had already called in concerns, running wasn't an option anymore. Not with a 3-week-old baby. "Give me 5 minutes," he said, closing the door. Marcus looked around the small house with new eyes, seeing it as a stranger might. It was clean enough. He'd learned quickly that babies required constant attention to hygiene. But it was also Spartan, clearly the home of a man who'd never planned on domestic life. The only feminine touches were Sarah's things, which he couldn't bring himself to pack away. Emma had fallen back asleep in his arms. He placed her gently in the portable bassinet he kept in the living room, then did a quick mental inventory. The house was clean, the baby was healthy. His bike was in the garage, not prominently displayed. Nothing immediately screamed dangerous criminal. But Marcus knew that wasn't what worried him most. It wasn't his past with the iron wolves that could destroy everything. It was the secret he'd buried with Sarah, the truth about the night she died. If this social worker started digging too deep, asking the wrong questions, connecting the wrong dots. He opened the door fully, stepping aside to let Diana Walsh enter his home. As she crossed the threshold, he caught a glimpse of a black sedan parked across the street, windows too tinted to see inside. "Can I offer you some coffee?" he asked, forcing his voice to remain steady, while his instincts screamed that this was just the beginning of something much worse. The crying had stopped an hour ago, but Jake still found himself checking on Emma every few minutes. She lay in her makeshift crib, tiny fists curled against her chest, breathing in the steady rhythm that had become his lifeline. He'd learned to read the subtle changes in her sleep patterns, the way her eyebrows would furrow just before she'd wake hungry, the soft sighs that meant she was dreaming. Outside, the desert wind rattled the windows of the safe house. Jake had chosen this place carefully, remote enough to avoid unwanted visitors, close enough to civilization that he could get supplies when needed. The house sat on 20 acres of scrubland, with clear sightlines in every direction. No one could approach without being seen, except someone had. Jake's hand instinctively moved to the Glock tucked into his waistband as he peered through the blinds. A dust cloud rose in the distance, growing larger as it approached down the dirt road. His jaw tightened. Only 3 people knew about this location, and 2 of them were dead. The vehicle materialized through the heat shimmer, a black sedan, government plates barely visible through the dust coating. Jake's pulse quickened. Federal agents didn't make social calls, especially not to men who'd supposedly died in motorcycle accidents 6 months ago. He moved with practiced efficiency, checking his weapons, ensuring the go bag was ready by the back door. Emma stirred in her crib, and he froze. If he had to run, carrying a 3-month-old would slow him down. If he had to fight... The car stopped 50 yards from the house, engine ticking in the desert silence. Jake watched through the scope of his rifle as a single figure emerged. Not what he'd expected. The man was tall, lean, wearing an expensive suit completely inappropriate for the Nevada heat. He moved with the fluid grace of someone accustomed to violence, but his hands remained visible, empty. Jake's phone buzzed. Unknown number. "Answer it, Mr. Morrison. I think we should talk." Through the scope, Jake watched the man lower his own phone. How the hell did he get this number? Jake had burned every contact, every connection to his old life. The phone buzzed again. "I'm not here to hurt you or the baby. My name is Marcus Webb. I represent certain interests that might align with your current predicament." Jake's finger hovered over the trigger. Representatives of certain interests usually meant one thing in his world: cleanup crews. People who made problems disappear permanently. But the man made no move toward the house. Instead, he walked to the front of his sedan and sat on the hood, hands clearly visible, waiting. The third buzz was accompanied by a text message, Sarah's final instructions. Jake's blood turned to ice. Sarah had been dead for 3 months. No one else knew about the contingency plans they'd made, the coded messages, the safety protocols. Unless, his wife's voice echoed in his memory, if anything happens to me, if you're ever truly alone with Emma, there's one person you can trust. He'll find you when the time is right. Jake had thought it was delirium from the pain medication. Sarah had been dying, her words often confused, desperate. But she'd made him memorize a phrase, insisted it was important. "What did she tell you?" Jake called out through the window. Webb's voice carried easily across the desert air. "She said you'd need to hear this. The sparrow knows where the eagle nests, but only love can teach it to fly." The rifle nearly slipped from Jake's hands. Those were Sarah's exact words, spoken in her final moments, words no one else could have known. Emma began to fuss behind him, probably sensing his tension. Jake's mind raced through possibilities. This could be an elaborate trap, somehow extracted from Sarah before she died. Or it could be what she'd claimed, insurance, help when he needed it most. The man on the hood showed no signs of impatience, content to wait in the blazing sun, professional, patient. Either a very good friend or a very dangerous enemy. Jake's secure laptop chimed from the kitchen table. He kept the rifle trained on Webb while checking the screen. A new email, encrypted, bearing Sarah's digital signature. Impossible. He'd destroyed all her devices, wiped every account. The message was brief, Jake. "If you're reading this, I'm gone and you're in trouble. Webb is clean. He works for the same people who are hunting you, but he's not loyal to them. Trust him with Emma's life. You can't do this alone." S. Through the window, Webb remained motionless, allowing Jake time to process. Smart. Pushing now would only spook him. Emma's crying grew more insistent. Jake glanced at her, then back at the man outside. 3 months of isolation, 3 months of jumping at every sound, every shadow. 3 months of wondering if today would be the day they found him. Maybe Sarah had been right. Maybe he couldn't protect Emma alone. But trust was a luxury he'd lost the night everything went wrong. The morning light filtered through the grimy kitchen window as Jake stood at the counter, mechanically spooning formula into a bottle. His hands moved with practiced efficiency, though dark circles under his eyes betrayed another sleepless night. Emma had been fussy until nearly dawn, and every cry had sent his nerves into overdrive, expecting to hear footsteps on his porch or the rumble of unwelcome motorcycles in his driveway. He'd been living on borrowed time for 3 weeks now, ever since Sarah's death. Every day that passed without the serpents coming to collect what they believed he owed them felt like a small miracle. But miracles had a way of running out, and Jake knew his luck wouldn't hold forever. The sound of gravel crunching under tires made him freeze, the formula canister slipping from his fingers and clattering across the counter. Through the window he watched a dusty sedan pull into his driveway. Not the serpents then. They rode bikes, not cars. But that didn't necessarily mean good news. Jake quickly assembled the bottle and scooped Emma from her bouncer, holding her close as he moved to the front window. A woman emerged from the sedan, middle-aged with graying hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She wore khakis and a polo shirt, carried a leather satchel, and had the unmistakable bearing of someone official. Social services, maybe, or worse. The knock came soft but insistent. Jake waited, hoping she might give up and leave, but the knocking repeated. Emma began to fuss in his arms, sensing his tension. "Mr. Morrison? I know you're in there. I can hear the baby." Her voice carried the kind of authority that suggested she wouldn't be easily discouraged. Jake cursed under his breath, then moved to the door, keeping the chain lock engaged as he cracked it open. "Who's asking?" The woman smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "My name is Detective Linda Reeves. I'm investigating your wife's accident. I was hoping we could talk." Jake's blood ran cold. The official story was that Sarah had lost control of her bike on a wet road. A tragic accident, nothing more. If there was a detective asking questions, it meant someone suspected the truth. The question was how much she knew and who had sent her. "I already talked to the police," Jake said, trying to keep his voice steady. "Gave my statement and everything. I understand this is difficult, Mr. Morrison, but some new information has come to light. May I come in?" Every instinct screamed at him to refuse, to send her away. But innocent men didn't slam doors on detectives, and Jake needed to maintain his cover. Reluctantly, he closed the door, unlatched the chain, and opened it wide. Detective Reeves stepped inside, her sharp eyes immediately cataloguing the details of his home. The empty beer bottles he'd forgotten to throw away, the pile of unwashed laundry, the general chaos of a man barely keeping his head above water. Her gaze lingered on Emma, and Jake saw something that might have been sympathy flicker across her face. "Thank you," she said, setting her satchel down on the coffee table. "I can see you're dealing with a lot right now." Jake remained standing, Emma still in his arms. "What kind of new information?" Reeves pulled out a small notebook, flipping through several pages with deliberate slowness. "We've received reports that your wife may have been involved with some unsavory characters before her death, people who might have had reason to wish her harm." The words hit Jake like a physical blow, but he forced his expression to remain neutral. Someone had talked, but who? And how much did they know? "Sarah wasn't involved with anyone unsavory," he said carefully. "She was a good person." "I'm sure she was." Reeves looked up from her notebook. "But sometimes good people get caught up in bad situations. We have reason to believe she may have witnessed something she shouldn't have, something that made her a liability." Jake's mind raced. This detective was fishing, trying to get him to reveal information. But was she legitimately investigating Sarah's death? Or was this something else entirely? In his world, cops could be bought just as easily as anyone else. "I don't know what you think you've heard," Jake said, "but my wife died in an accident. She hit a patch of wet road and lost control. That's what happened." Reeves studied his face for a long moment. "Mr. Morrison, if you know something, if someone threatened your wife, or if you're in danger yourself, I can help, but only if you're honest with me." Emma chose that moment to start crying, her wails filling the tense silence. Jake bounced her gently, using the distraction to buy himself time to think. This detective was either genuinely trying to help or setting an elaborate trap. Either way, telling her the truth would likely get them all killed. "I appreciate your concern," he said finally, "but we're fine. Sarah's death was an accident, and that's all there is to it." Detective Reeves closed her notebook with a snap that sounded like a door slamming shut. The morning came too soon, sunlight bleeding through the thin curtains like an unwelcome visitor. Jake had managed maybe 3 hours of broken sleep, his body wound tight with the kind of tension that had become his constant companion. The baby had finally settled around 4, but Jake's mind refused to follow suit, cycling through scenarios and contingencies until exhaustion forced his eyes shut. Sarah's cry cut through the quiet house, sharp and demanding. Jake rolled out of bed, his joints protesting the movement, and padded to the nursery. As he lifted her from the crib, he caught a glimpse of movement outside the window. Marcus's rental car pulling into the driveway. The man was punctual. Jake had to give him that. "Looks like our visitor's back, sweetheart," he murmured to Sarah, bouncing her gently. Her cries subsided to frustrated whimpers, and Jake felt the familiar stab of inadequacy. Elena would have known exactly what she needed. Elena would have made it look effortless. The knock came as Jake was warming a bottle, one-handed, while Sarah fussed against his shoulder. He debated ignoring it, pretending he wasn't home, but Marcus had already seen the lights, heard the baby. There was no escaping this conversation. Jake opened the door to find Marcus holding 2 coffee cups and a white paper bag that smelled like fresh pastries. The man looked well-rested, his clothes crisp despite the early hour. Everything about him radiated competence and control, qualities that used to come naturally to Jake before his world turned upside down. "Thought you might need caffeine," Marcus said, offering one of the cups. "And breakfast. You look like you've been up all night." "Most of it," Jake admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. The warmth seeped through the paper cup into his fingers, and he realized how cold he'd been. "Sarah's still adjusting to everything." Marcus stepped inside without invitation, setting the pastry bag on the kitchen counter. His eyes swept the room, taking in the scattered baby supplies, the unwashed dishes, the general chaos that had become Jake's normal. If he was judging, he kept it off his face. "Mind if I ask you something?" Marcus pulled a chair away from the kitchen table and sat down, making himself comfortable. "Elena ever mention anything about her past? Before you met?" The question hit Jake like a physical blow. He shifted Sarah to his other arm, buying time while his mind raced. "Why would you ask that?" "Lawyer habits, I guess. I like to understand the full picture before I make recommendations." Marcus sipped his coffee, watching Jake over the rim. "Financial planning is more effective when you know someone's complete history, assets, debts, family obligations, that sort of thing." Jake tested the bottle temperature against his wrist, then offered it to Sarah. She latched on hungrily, her small hands grasping at the plastic. Elena was an open book. We didn't have secrets. It was a lie, and they both knew it. Elena had been many things, passionate, fierce, fiercely protective, but never completely open. There had always been shadows in her past, corners she wouldn't let him explore. He'd respected that boundary, trusted that when she was ready, she'd share what she needed to share. Now those shadows felt like landmines, waiting to explode. "Of course," Marcus said smoothly. "It's just that some of the financial records raise questions. Nothing concerning, necessarily, but irregular." "What kind of questions?" "Large cash deposits, always under the reporting threshold but consistent, almost like someone was being very careful about avoiding attention." Marcus leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a more intimate register. "Look, Jake, I'm not here to judge, but if there's something I should know, something that might affect Sarah's security or your own, now's the time to tell me." Jake's grip tightened on the bottle. Sarah sensed his tension and pulled away, milk dribbling down her chin. She started to fuss again, and Jake stood abruptly, pacing to the window while he burped her. Outside, the neighborhood was waking up, normal people living normal lives, unaware of the conversation happening in his kitchen. "The cash was from her job," he said finally. "Tips, mostly. She worked at an upscale place, made good money." Another lie, smoother this time. Elena had worked at Rossetti's, sure, but no waitress made the kind of money those deposits represented. The truth was something darker, more complicated. The truth was that Elena had been running from something when she'd found her way to this small town, to his garage, to him, and whatever she'd been running from had finally caught up. Marcus nodded slowly, but his eyes never left Jake's reflection in the window. "Tips." "Right. Well, like I said, I'm just trying to get the complete picture." Sarah had gone quiet against Jake's shoulder, her breathing evening out into the rhythm of sleep. He turned back to face Marcus, this stranger who seemed to know too much and reveal too little. "What exactly are you offering to help with, Marcus? Because right now it feels more like an interrogation than financial planning." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just trying to be thorough, Jake. For Sarah's sake." The first thing Marcus noticed when he walked into the diner was how Claire sat differently now. 3 days of helping with Emma had changed her posture, less rigid, more natural, as if she'd found something she'd been searching for. She looked up from her coffee with a smile that made his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't name. "How's our girl this morning?" Claire asked, reaching for the baby carrier before Marcus had even sat down. "Our girl." The word should have set off alarms, but instead they settled into his bones like warmth. He watched Claire's face soften as she peered down at Emma, who was mercifully still asleep after their first successful night with only one feeding interruption. "Better. Thanks to you." Marcus slumped into the booth, exhaustion making his shoulders heavy. "I don't know how single parents do this." "You're not single," Claire said quietly, not looking up from Emma. "You have help now." The certainty in her voice made something cold crawl up Marcus's spine. He studied her profile, the way her finger traced Emma's tiny hand, the possessive curve of her body around the carrier. How long had it been since he'd seen Claire interact with other people in town? Come to think of it, had he seen her talk to anyone else at all? "Claire," he kept his voice casual, "what did you do before you came here?" Her hand stilled on Emma's blanket. I told you. I was a nurse. Where? Different places. I moved around a lot. She finally looked up, and for just a moment, her eyes held something sharp and guarded. Then she smiled, and it was gone so quickly Marcus wondered if he'd imagined it. Why all the questions? Before he could answer, Rita appeared with coffee and her usual concerned expression. "You look better, honey," she told Marcus, then nodded at Claire. "Though I have to say, I'm surprised to see you two becoming so close. Especially so soon after... After what?" Claire's voice was pleasant, but something in her tone made Rita take a small step back. "After Sarah, of course. It's just that some folks in town are wondering." "Let them wonder." Marcus cut her off, surprised by the protective anger that flared in his chest. "Claire's been helping with Emma, that's all." Rita held up her hands. "I didn't mean anything by it. It's just that loss can make people vulnerable to making decisions they might regret later." As Rita walked away, Claire reached across the table and covered Marcus's hand with hers. Her skin was cold despite the warm diner, and her grip was stronger than it should have been. "She doesn't understand," Claire said. "People like that never do. They can't see when something is meant to be." The words triggered a memory that had been nagging at him for days. Sarah's last conversation with her sister, which he'd overheard from the hospital hallway. Something about being afraid, about someone who had been asking questions about her pregnancy. Sarah had been agitated, paranoid even, but he'd attributed it to hormones and stress. Now he wondered if there had been more to it. "Claire, did you know Sarah before she died?" The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Claire's face went very still, but she didn't remove her hand from his. "Why would you ask that?" "Because Emma took to you immediately, because you knew exactly how to help her sleep, because you appeared in my life at the exact moment I needed you most." Marcus pulled his hand away, his pulse quickening. "That's either an incredible coincidence or what?" Claire's voice was soft, but there was steel underneath. "Or I planned it somehow." "Marcus, listen to yourself. You're grieving and exhausted, and you're looking for patterns that aren't there." But even as she spoke, Marcus was remembering other details. How Claire never seemed surprised by Emma's needs or schedule, how she'd known where everything was in his house after only one visit, how she'd appeared at the cemetery like she'd been waiting for him. Emma stirred in her carrier, making small sounds of distress. Immediately, Claire's attention shifted to the baby, and her voice took on a crooning quality that made Marcus's blood run cold. "It's okay, sweetheart. Daddy's just upset, but everything's going to be fine. Mommy's here now." The word hung in the air between them like poison. Claire seemed to realize what she'd said, but instead of looking embarrassed or apologetic, she met Marcus's stare with something that might have been defiance. "She needs a mother, Marcus. You know she does. And I need—" She stopped herself, but not before Marcus heard the desperate hunger in her voice. He stood up slowly, reaching for Emma's carrier. "We should go." Claire's hand shot out, gripping his wrist with surprising strength. "Don't run from this. Don't run from me. Not when we could be a real family." The mask was slipping now, and underneath, Marcus caught a glimpse of something that made every instinct scream danger. The baby's cries pierced through the morning silence like a siren, jolting Marcus from the first decent sleep he'd managed in weeks. He stumbled to the crib, his body moving on autopilot as his mind struggled to catch up. Emma's face was red and scrunched, her tiny fists beating the air in frustrated hunger. "All right, sweetheart, I'm here," he whispered, lifting her against his chest. The familiar weight of her small body grounded him, pushing away the fragments of nightmares that still clung to the edges of his consciousness. As he prepared her bottle with practiced efficiency, Marcus caught sight of movement through the kitchen window. A figure stood at the edge of his property line, partially obscured by the morning mist that rolled across the fields. His hand instinctively moved toward the drawer where he kept Sarah's old revolver, but the figure raised a hand in greeting. It was Elena. She approached the house with that same measured stride he'd noticed before, carrying a canvas bag and wearing clothes that seemed too clean, too deliberate for someone claiming to be just passing through. Marcus settled Emma in her bouncer and opened the door before Elena could knock. "You're up early," he said, studying her face for any sign of deception. "Old habits. Military training never really leaves you." She gestured toward the bag. "I brought some things for the baby. Formula, diapers, some clothes that might fit her better than those hand-me-downs." Marcus felt a flicker of irritation at the implied criticism, but Emma chose that moment to gurgle happily at the sight of Elena, her chubby arms reaching toward the stranger. The innocent gesture twisted something in his chest. "That's kind of you, but we're managing fine." Elena stepped closer, and he caught a whiff of her perfume, something expensive and out of place in his sparse kitchen. "Are you? Because from where I'm standing, you look like a man who hasn't slept properly in months." She wasn't wrong, but admitting weakness felt dangerous. Everything felt dangerous lately. "What do you want, Elena?" "To help." Her dark eyes searched his face. "I know what it's like to lose someone you love, to feel like you're drowning while everyone expects you to keep swimming." There was something in her voice that made him pause, a crack in her composed exterior that seemed genuine. But Marcus had learned the hard way that appearances could be deadly. "How long were you watching the house this morning?" The question caught her off guard, and for a split second, her mask slipped. "I wasn't watching. I was walking and saw your light come on." "Walking from where?" "The nearest town is 20 miles away." Elena's smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm staying at the old Morrison place down the road, renting it month to month, while I figure out what comes next." Marcus knew the Morrison property had been empty for years, ever since old Jim died, and his kids moved to the city. But that didn't mean someone couldn't have rented it without him knowing. Still, something about her story felt rehearsed. Emma began to fuss again, and Elena moved forward instinctively. "May I?" Against his better judgment, Marcus found himself nodding. Elena lifted Emma with the practiced ease of someone who'd held babies before, bouncing her gently as she hummed a soft melody. The baby settled immediately, staring up at Elena with fascination. "She's beautiful," Elena murmured. "She has your eyes, but there's something of her mother in her expression." Marcus stiffened. He'd never mentioned Sarah's name, never described her. "How would you know what her mother looked like?" Elena's hands stilled on Emma's back. "I just meant, children often carry pieces of both parents. It's just an observation." But Marcus's instincts were screaming now. He moved closer, ready to take Emma back, when Elena's phone buzzed. She shifted the baby to one arm and glanced at the screen, her face darkening. "Everything all right?" he asked, though he was more concerned about the way her expression had changed. "Work," she said curtly, powering off the phone. "Some people don't understand the concept of time off." "What kind of work do you do?" Elena handed Emma back to him, her movement suddenly efficient and cold. "Consulting, risk assessment for insurance companies. It's boring stuff, but it pays the bills." She gathered her bag and moved toward the door, her earlier warmth evaporating. "I should go." "But Marcus? Be careful who you trust out here. Sometimes the most dangerous threats come from the places you least expect." The warning sent ice through his veins, especially coming from someone who'd just proven she knew more about his family than she should. As Elena walked away, disappearing into the morning mist as quietly as she'd appeared, Marcus found himself wondering if her cryptic words were a threat or a genuine warning. Either way, he was beginning to suspect that Elena's arrival in his life was no coincidence. The baby's cry pierced through Jake's restless sleep at 3 a.m, dragging him from dreams filled with Elena's face and the stranger's knowing smile. He stumbled to the crib, lifting his daughter with practiced motions that still felt foreign on his calloused hands. "Shh, little one," he whispered, checking her diaper before settling into the rocking chair Elena had insisted they buy. The chair creaked under his weight as he fed her the bottle he'd prepared earlier, watching her tiny fists curl against the plastic. Outside, wind rattled the windows of their small house, and Jake found himself glancing toward the curtains every few seconds. The stranger's words echoed in his mind. "I know what you're hiding." 3 days had passed since their encounter at the diner, and Jake hadn't seen him since, but the threat lingered like smoke in the air. His phone buzzed on the side table, a text from an unknown number. "Sweet little girl. She has her mother's eyes." Jake's blood turned to ice. The bottle slipped from his grip, formula splashing across his shirt as the baby began to fuss. Someone had been watching them. Someone had been close enough to see his daughter's face. He carried the baby to the front window, peering through a gap in the curtains. The street appeared empty under the yellow glow of streetlights, but shadows seemed to move between parked cars. His Harley sat in the driveway, chrome gleaming, and for a moment he considered loading the baby into her carrier and riding until they reached somewhere safe. But where could they go that the past wouldn't follow? Another text arrived. "Meet me tomorrow, noon, the old warehouse on 5th Street. Come alone, or everyone learns about that night 2 months ago." Jake's jaw clenched. 2 months ago. The night everything had gone wrong, when what should have been a simple club business meeting had turned into something that would haunt him forever. The night that had set everything in motion, leading to Elena's death, and now this stranger's threats. He looked down at his daughter, now peacefully sleeping against his chest. Her breathing was soft and even, completely trusting in his protection. The weight of that trust felt heavier than any burden he'd carried with the reapers. The next morning brought grey skies and the smell of rain. Jake called his neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, asking if she could watch the baby for a few hours. The elderly woman had been a godsend since Elena's death, never asking questions about his comings and goings. "Of course, dear," she said, her voice warm with concern. "You look tired. Are you taking care of yourself?" Jake managed a weak smile as he handed over the diaper bag. "Trying to, Mrs. Patterson. I'll be back soon." The warehouse district felt like a graveyard in the midday gloom. Abandoned buildings lined 5th Street, their broken windows staring down like empty eyes. Jake parked his bike 2 blocks away and walked, his boots echoing against cracked pavement. The weight of the pistol tucked beneath his jacket provided little comfort. The warehouse stood at the end of the street, its loading dock doors hanging open like a mouth waiting to swallow him whole. Jake checked his watch, 11:58. He'd survived this long by being early to meetings, by controlling what variables he could. Inside, dust motes danced in shafts of light streaming through high windows. The stranger stood in the center of the empty space, wearing the same expensive suit despite the industrial setting. Up close, Jake could see the man was older than he'd first appeared, with silver threading through his dark hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of hard experience. "You came," the stranger said, his voice echoing off concrete walls. "What do you want?" Jake kept his distance, ready to move if necessary. "Justice," the word hung between them like a blade. "My name is Marcus Vaughn. 2 months ago, you and your club killed my son." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Tommy Vaughn, the young man who'd been skimming money from their drug operations, who'd panicked when confronted and pulled a gun. The kid who'd died when everything went sideways in that abandoned parking lot. "It wasn't supposed to happen that way," Jake said quietly. But it did happen. Marcus pulled out a manila envelope, letting photographs spill across a nearby crate. Crime scene photos, pictures of Jake's bike at the location. "The police wrote it off as gang violence, but I know better. I know it was you who pulled the trigger." Jake's hand moved instinctively toward his weapon, but Marcus shook his head. "Kill me, and these photos go to every news outlet in the city. Your daughter grows up knowing her father is a murderer." Marcus smiled coldly. "I have a different proposition for you, Mr. Sullivan. You're going to help me destroy the Reapers from the inside. Every operation, every deal, every dirty secret. You're going to be my weapon of justice." The warehouse fell silent except for the distant rumble of traffic. Jake stared at the photographs, seeing his future crumble with each black and white image. The baby's cries pierced through the pre-dawn darkness, jolting Marcus awake from another restless sleep. His hand instinctively reached across the bed, searching for Sarah's warmth, before reality crashed back down on him. She was gone. Had been gone for 3 weeks now. Marcus stumbled to the crib, his leather jacket still draped over the chair where he'd thrown it hours earlier. The smell of motor oil and cigarettes clung to everything in the small apartment above the garage. He lifted Emma gently, her tiny fists flailing as her wails echoed off the thin walls. "Shh, baby girl. Daddy's here." His voice cracked with exhaustion. Dark circles shadowed his eyes, and stubble covered his jaw. The man who once commanded respect among the Serpent's MC now looked broken, defeated by something as simple as a feeding schedule. As he prepared the formula with shaking hands, Marcus caught his reflection in the kitchen window. Behind the glass, the morning light revealed someone standing in the shadows of the alley. His blood ran cold. The figure was tall, wearing a dark coat, watching the building with an intensity that made Marcus's skin crawl. He quickly stepped away from the window, clutching Emma closer. This was the third time this week he'd noticed someone lurking around the neighborhood. First outside the diner where he'd grabbed coffee, then at the gas station, and now here. The paranoia that had kept him alive in the MC was screaming warnings he couldn't ignore. The burner phone on the counter buzzed. Marcus hesitated before answering, knowing only 3 people had this number. "Yeah? Marcus, it's Detective Walsh. We need to talk." His grip tightened on the phone. Walsh had been Sarah's friend since high school, one of the few cops who didn't automatically assume the worst about him. "What about?" "Not over the phone. Meet me at Rosie's diner in an hour. Come alone." The line went dead. Marcus stared at the phone, his mind racing. Emma had finally settled in his arms, her breathing even and peaceful. Whatever Walsh wanted, it couldn't be good news. Cops didn't call at dawn for social visits. He peered through the window again. The figure in the alley was gone, but that only made him more nervous. Marcus had learned long ago that enemies you couldn't see were the most dangerous kind. After feeding and changing Emma, he loaded her into the car seat, checking the street carefully before heading to the diner. The early morning traffic was light, making it easy to spot the black sedan that had been following him since he left the garage. His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. Rosie's diner sat on the edge of town, a greasy spoon that served truckers and shift workers. Walsh was already there, sitting in a corner booth with her back to the wall. Her auburn hair was pulled back severely, and her expression was grim. "Thanks for coming," she said, as Marcus slid into the opposite seat, keeping Emma's carrier close. "How are you holding up?" "Cut the small talk, Walsh. What do you want?" She studied him for a moment, then pulled out a manila folder. "Someone's been asking questions about you, about Sarah's accident." Marcus felt ice form in his stomach. "What kind of questions?" "The kind that suggest they think there's more to the story." Walsh opened the folder, revealing several photographs. "Private investigator named Thornton, real professional, expensive suit, asking around about your past with the Serpents." The photos showed a man in his 50s, silver-haired and lean. Marcus didn't recognize him, but something about the eyes made him uneasy. Cold, calculating. Who hired him? That's what I'm trying to figure out. He's been discreet, but not invisible. Paid cash for information, which means he's either very careful or very dirty. Walsh leaned forward. "Marcus, I need to know. Is there anything about Sarah's death that you haven't told me?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Marcus looked down at Emma, sleeping peacefully in her carrier, completely unaware that her world was built on a foundation of lies. The truth sat heavy in his chest, a weight that threatened to crush him. Sarah died in a car accident. End of story. And the club? Your sudden departure from the Serpents? I told you. I wanted out before the baby came. Sarah didn't want that life for our daughter. Walsh's eyes searched his face. She was good at reading people, had to be in her line of work. The Serpents don't usually let people just walk away, Marcus. Especially not their enforcer. The word hung between them like a loaded gun. Enforcer, the polite term for the man who collected debts and silenced problems, the man who knew where too many bodies were buried. People change, Marcus said quietly. Do they? Walsh closed the folder. Because if they don't, if someone thinks you know something worth killing for, then you and Emma are in danger. The rain drummed against the windows of the safe house like skeletal fingers tapping out a death march. Marcus stood in the dim hallway, watching Elena through the cracked bedroom door as she slept fitfully in the chair beside Emma's crib. The baby's soft breathing was the only sound that brought him any comfort in this nightmare they'd stumbled into. 3 days had passed since they'd fled the cabin, and Marcus felt the walls closing in with each passing hour. The safe house belonged to an old club contact, someone who owed him enough favors to keep quiet, but Marcus knew their sanctuary was temporary. Vincent's reach extended far beyond what most people understood, and staying in one place too long was suicide. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message was simple, chilling. "You can't hide forever, brother." Marcus deleted it immediately, but the words burned in his mind. Vincent knew he was still alive, which meant the hunt was far from over. Worse, it meant Elena and Emma were still in danger because of choices he'd made years ago. Elena stirred in the chair, her eyes opening to find him standing in the doorway. Even exhausted and running for their lives, she possessed a strength that reminded him of Sarah. But where Sarah had been fierce and direct, Elena carried herself with a calculated grace that spoke of someone accustomed to navigating dangerous waters. "Any word from your contact?" she whispered, careful not to wake Emma. Marcus shook his head. "Tommy's still working on new identities, says it might take another day or two." "We don't have another day or two." Elena stood, stretching her cramped muscles. "Vincent's people are good at what they do. They'll find this place soon enough." She was right, and Marcus hated that she understood the situation better than he wanted to admit. Elena's knowledge of Vincent's operation went deeper than casual observation, and every conversation revealed another layer of familiarity with the criminal underworld that should have raised more red flags than it did. "Tell me something," Marcus said, stepping fully into the room. "When you first showed up at my place, you said you were there about Sarah's case, but you knew things about my past with Vincent that weren't in any police file." Elena's expression didn't change, but Marcus caught the slight tension in her shoulders. "I told you, I'm thorough in my research." "No cop is that thorough. Not about details that happened 15 years ago in a completely different state." Marcus moved closer, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Who are you really, Elena?" For a long moment she said nothing. Then she walked to the window, peering through the blinds at the empty street below. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight he hadn't heard before. "My name is Elena Vasquez. That part is true. But I'm not investigating Sarah's death for the local police department." She turned back to face him. "I'm FBI, Marcus. Deep cover, working a long-term operation to bring down Vincent Cordova's network." The revelation hit him like a physical blow. FBI. Everything began to click into place. Her knowledge of Vincent's operation, her ease with violence, the way she'd known exactly how to handle their escape from the cabin. "How long?" he asked. 3 years embedded in various capacities. When Sarah's murder showed potential connections to Vincent's organization, I was assigned to make contact with you. So everything between us with Emma..." Marcus felt the familiar rage building in his chest. "Started as an assignment," Elena admitted, "but it became something else. You have to believe that." Marcus wanted to rage, to demand answers, to throw her out into the rain and disappear with Emma before the FBI could use his daughter as leverage in their investigation. But a part of him, the part that had watched Elena care for Emma with genuine tenderness, recognized the truth in her words. "What's the endgame here?" he asked finally. "Vincent's expanding his operation, moving into human trafficking, specifically children. We need someone on the inside to help us bring him down before more kids disappear." The implication hung heavy between them. Vincent's interest in Emma suddenly made horrifying sense. Not just revenge against Marcus, but something far worse. "You want me to walk back into his world. We want to offer you a chance to end this permanently. Full immunity for your past involvement with his organization in exchange for cooperation." Marcus looked down at his sleeping daughter. Emma's tiny fist was curled around her blanket, her face peaceful despite the chaos surrounding them. She deserved better than a life spent running from his mistakes. And if I refuse? Elena's expression softened. Then we keep running until Vincent finds us, and eventually he will. Thunder rolled overhead, and Emma stirred in her crib. Marcus reached down to adjust her blanket, his mind racing through possibilities and consequences. The safe house suddenly felt smaller than ever. The rain drummed against the hospital windows as Marcus paced the sterile corridor, Emma sleeping fitfully in his arms. 3 hours had passed since they'd brought Tommy in, his face a mess of bruises and blood after the accident outside the garage. Marcus knew better. This wasn't random violence, it was a message. Dr. Reeves emerged from the treatment room, pulling off latex gloves. He's stable, but he took quite a beating. Concussion, 3 broken ribs, and his jaws wired shut for the next 6 weeks. She studied Marcus's face. Any idea who might have done this? Tommy's got a big mouth sometimes, Marcus said carefully. Could be anyone. The doctor's expression suggested she wasn't buying it, but she nodded anyway. He's asking for you. Room 314. Marcus found Tommy propped up in bed, looking like he'd gone 10 rounds with a freight train. His friend's eyes widened when he saw Emma, then narrowed with concern. They know, Tommy whispered through swollen lips, his words barely audible around the wire. About Sarah, about what really happened that night. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. What did you tell them? Nothing. But Marcus, Tommy grabbed his arm with surprising strength. It wasn't random guys who jumped me. One of them knew details. Said Sarah was a liability that needed cleaning up, just like I would be if I didn't keep my mouth shut. The baby stirred in Marcus's arms, making soft mewing sounds. He bounced her gently, his mind racing. Sarah's death hadn't been the complications during childbirth that everyone believed. She'd been murdered, silenced, because she'd discovered something about the Torino family's money laundering operation that ran through several local businesses, including the garage where Marcus worked. Did you see their faces? One of them, yeah. Tall guy, scar running down his left cheek, called himself Vincent. Tommy's voice was getting weaker. Marcus, they're cleaning house. Sarah found out about the books, and now they're making sure anyone who might know goes away permanently. Marcus's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. We need to talk. Midnight. The old pier. Come alone. He showed Tommy the message. His friend's face went pale beneath the bruises. Don't go, man. It's a trap. But Marcus was already thinking. If they wanted him dead, they wouldn't have bothered with a meeting. They wanted something else. Maybe the flash drive Sarah had hidden before she died, the one containing financial records that could bring down half the city's underground network. I have to. If I don't show, they'll just keep coming. He looked down at Emma, so small and vulnerable in his arms. Watch her for me? Marcus, no. Think about what you're doing. I am thinking about her. He kissed Emma's forehead, about giving her a chance at a normal life. The nurse agreed to let Tommy hold the baby while Marcus stepped out to make arrangements. He called Rachel from the club, the only person he trusted completely, and asked her to pick up Emma from the hospital. Something's wrong, she said immediately. What's going on? I can't explain right now. Just, if something happens to me, there's a safety deposit box at First National, keys taped under the kitchen sink. Everything Emma needs to know about her mother is in there. Marcus, you're scaring me. Promise me, Rachel. A long pause. I promise. But you better come back in one piece, you hear me? By 11:30, Marcus was parking his Harley near the abandoned pier. The rain had stopped, but fog rolled in off the water, making visibility nearly zero. He could hear footsteps on the wooden planks before he could see anyone. 3 figures emerged from the mist. The tall one with the scar had to be Vincent. The other 2 were muscle, broad-shouldered men who moved with the easy confidence of career enforcers. You came, Vincent said, his voice carrying a slight accent Marcus couldn't place. Smart man. What do you want? What your wife stole from us. The files, the photographs, the financial records, everything. Marcus kept his expression neutral. I don't know what you're talking about. Vincent smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Marcus, do you really want to play this game? Your friend Tommy is recovering nicely, but hospitals can be dangerous places. Accidents happen. Medication gets mixed up." He paused. "And that beautiful baby daughter of yours, such a tragedy if something were to happen to an innocent child." The threat hit Marcus like a physical blow. These weren't empty words. They'd already proven they were willing to kill to protect their secrets. "Sarah's dead," Marcus said. "Whatever she knew died with her." "We both know that's not true. She was too smart, too careful. She made copies, backup files, insurance." Vincent stepped closer. "You have 72 hours to find what she hid and bring it to us. All of it. And if I refuse," Vincent's smile widened, "then you'll join your wife much sooner than expected." The morning light filtered through the garage windows as Marcus finished adjusting the carburetor on his Harley, but his hands weren't steady. 3 days had passed since Sarah's visit, and her words echoed in his mind like a persistent engine knock he couldn't tune out. The baby monitor crackled softly from the workbench, Emma's gentle breathing the only sound keeping him tethered to the present. He'd been avoiding the clubhouse, making excuses about Emma's feeding schedule, but he knew Jake was getting suspicious. The brotherhood had always been built on trust and transparency, two things Marcus could no longer afford. The rumble of approaching motorcycles cut through his thoughts. Marcus wiped his hands on an oil-stained rag and peered through the window. Jake's Road King led a convoy of 3 bikes up the driveway. Behind him rode Tommy and Big Mike, their faces grim beneath their helmets. Marcus's chest tightened. This wasn't a social visit. He stepped outside as the engines died, the sudden silence heavy with unspoken tension. Jake removed his helmet and studied Marcus with calculating eyes that had seen too much over the years. "We need to talk," Jake said, his voice carrying an edge Marcus had rarely heard directed at him. "Emma's sleeping. Can this wait until—" "No." Tommy dismounted, his bulk casting a shadow across the driveway. "It can't wait." Marcus glanced toward the house, weighing his options. Running wasn't possible with Emma inside, and even if it were, these men had been his brothers for 15 years. They deserved better than lies, but the truth would destroy them all. "Garage," Marcus said finally, leading them into the dim space that smelled of motor oil and old leather. Jake closed the door behind them, the click of the latch sounding like a cell door. "Tell me about the warehouse job." The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. He kept his expression neutral, but his pulse hammered against his throat. "Which warehouse?" "Don't." Jake's voice carried a warning. "Don't lie to me, Marcus. Not after everything." Big Mike shifted uncomfortably, his massive frame blocking the side door. These men, who'd stood by him through Rebecca's funeral, who'd helped paint Emma's nursery, were now his captors. "I don't know what you're talking about," Marcus said, but the words felt hollow even to him. Tommy pulled out his phone, the screen glowing as he scrolled through something. "Funny thing about security cameras these days, they're everywhere, and the quality keeps getting better." Marcus's blood turned to ice water. "Now the footage from the warehouse itself was destroyed in the fire," Tommy continued, his tone conversational but deadly. "But the traffic cam 2 blocks away, that one caught something interesting. A Harley matching your bike's description, same custom exhaust pipes you installed last spring, heading toward the warehouse district at 11:47 p.m. on the night everything went to hell." The garage felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. Marcus could hear Emma stirring through the monitor, her soft whimpers indicating she'd wake soon wanting her bottle. The normalcy of her needs felt surreal against the mounting evidence of his guilt. "Could be anyone's bike," Marcus said, but his voice lacked conviction. Jake stepped closer, and Marcus saw something break behind his old friend's eyes. "Sarah Hendricks came to see me yesterday." The words hit like a sledgehammer. Marcus felt his knees threaten to buckle, but he forced himself to remain standing. Sarah had played him perfectly, offering sympathy and understanding while gathering intelligence to destroy him. "She's DEA, Marcus. Has been for 8 years, and she's been building a case that could put all of us away for life." The betrayal cut deeper than fear. Rebecca's friend from college, the woman who'd held Emma with such tenderness, who'd seemed to understand his grief. It had all been an elaborate lie. But then Marcus realized something that chilled him further. If Sarah was DEA, she already had enough evidence to arrest him. So why the games? She wants something from you, Jake continued, reading his thoughts. Something big enough that she's willing to risk blowing her cover. The question is, what do you have that's worth more to her than putting us all in cages? Emma's cries grew stronger through the monitor, her hungry wails cutting through the tension. Marcus reached for the door handle, but Tommy's hand shot out, stopping him. "The baby can wait," Tommy growled. "This conversation can't." But Marcus shook his head, something fierce and protective rising in his chest. "No, she can't wait. She's just lost her mother, and I won't let her cry alone because of my mistakes." He pushed past Tommy's bulk, surprising the larger man with his sudden intensity. "If you want answers, they'll have to wait until I take care of my daughter. Some things are more important than your questions." As he walked toward the house, Marcus felt their eyes boring into his back. Emma's cries grew louder, more desperate, and he quickened his pace. Whatever came next, whatever Sarah's true game was, he had to protect the one innocent thing in this mess, even if it cost him everything else. The Harley's engine cut through the pre-dawn silence like a blade, its rumble echoing off the empty warehouse walls as Jake pulled into the abandoned industrial district. Behind him, Marcus followed on his own bike, the sound of their engines creating a symphony of controlled violence in the darkness. Jake's hands trembled slightly on the handlebars, not from fear, but from the rage coursing through his veins like liquid fire. Sarah's betrayal had cut deeper than any knife. The woman he'd trusted with Emma, the woman who'd wormed her way into their lives with promises of help and understanding, had been recording everything. Every vulnerable moment, every breakdown, every desperate confession about the night everything went wrong. She had it all, and now she thought she could use it to destroy him. The warehouse Jake had chosen stood like a monument to decay, its broken windows staring down at them like dead eyes. He'd done business here before, in the darker days when the club's activities strayed far from legitimate. The walls had witnessed secrets that would never see daylight, and tonight they would witness one more. Marcus killed his engine and removed his helmet, his weathered face grim in the fluorescent light of the single working street lamp. "She here yet?" Jake checked his phone. 3:17 a.m. Sarah would arrive soon. He'd made sure of that with his carefully crafted message about having the money she wanted. The desperation in his voice had been real enough. She wouldn't suspect the trap. Any minute now. Jake's voice was steady despite the storm raging inside him. He thought of Emma, sleeping peacefully in Carol's arms back at the safe house. His daughter would never know the lengths he'd go to protect her future. "Remember, we need that phone first. Without it, she's just another missing person." The distant sound of a car engine made them both tense. Headlights swept across the warehouse walls as Sarah's rental sedan pulled into the lot. She parked 20 feet away, her silhouette visible behind the windshield as she sat motionless for nearly a minute, scanning the area for any sign of danger. When she finally emerged from the car, Jake was struck by how different she looked. Gone was the maternal warmth, the gentle demeanor that had fooled him so completely. In its place stood a predator, confident and calculating, a woman who'd built her life on exploiting others' pain. "Jake!" she called out, her voice carrying false cheer across the empty lot. "I was beginning to think you'd changed your mind about our arrangement." He stepped out of the shadows, keeping his hands visible but ready. "I've got your money. 50,000, just like you asked." Sarah's smile was sharp as broken glass. "And I've got insurance that you'll keep paying." Amazing what people will confess when they think they're talking to a friend. She held up her phone, waggling it like a treat for a dog. Poor Jake, so torn up about that night. About how it wasn't really self-defense after all. The words hit him like physical blows, but Jake forced himself to remain calm. "You don't know what you're talking about, don't I?" Sarah's laugh was cold and musical. "I know about the drugs you were running for the serpents. I know about the deal that went bad, the The one where you didn't just defend yourself, you hunted them down. I know about the 3 men you killed in that warehouse across town, and I know the police never connected to it because you made it look like a gang hit." Jake's heart hammered against his ribs. She knew too much, far more than he'd ever told her. How long had she been investigating him? How deep did her knowledge go? "The best part," Sarah continued, stepping closer with predatory confidence, "is that I know about Lisa's involvement. Your sweet, innocent wife helped you stage the scene. She was your lookout, your alibi, your partner in murder. And when she started having second thoughts about keeping quiet," Sarah's smile turned vicious, "well, that's when things got really interesting." The implication hung in the air like poison gas. Jake felt the world tilt beneath his feet as Sarah's true knowledge became clear. She wasn't just talking about the warehouse killings, she was suggesting he'd killed Lisa too. "You're insane," he whispered, but even as the words left his lips, doubt crept in. Lisa's sudden change before her death, her talk of confessing everything, of starting clean for Emma's sake, the stress that had been killing their marriage in those final weeks. Sarah pulled out a small recording device, pressing play. Jake's own voice filled the night air, slurred with grief and exhaustion. "Sometimes I wonder if she'd have destroyed us all. Emma deserves better than parents who are murderers." The words had been innocent, born of guilt and self-recrimination. But stripped of context, played back in this moment, they sounded like a confession to something far worse than Jake had ever imagined himself capable of. "Insurance," Sarah repeated softly. "I think we need to renegotiate our terms." The warehouse smelled of rust and abandonment, dust motes dancing in the pale shafts of moonlight that filtered through broken windows. Marcus crouched behind a stack of rotting pallets, Sarah's carrier nestled securely against his chest, her tiny form mercifully asleep, despite the chaos that had brought them here. Every shadow seemed to breathe with menace. Every creak of settling metal made his hand drift toward the gun tucked beneath his jacket. 3 hours had passed since Elena's call. 3 hours of running, of checking mirrors, of taking random turns through neighborhoods he barely recognized. The Serpent's clubhouse was compromised. Elena had made that clear. Whoever was hunting them had resources, connections that ran deeper than either of them had imagined. "You sure this place is clean?" Marcus whispered as Elena emerged from the darkness, her movements fluid and predatory even in retreat. "Clean as anything can be right now." She settled beside him, her back against a concrete pillar. In the dim light, he could see the tension carved into her features, the way her eyes never stopped moving, cataloguing exits and blind spots. "But we can't stay long. They're closing the net." Marcus adjusted Sarah's blanket, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle against the soft fabric. "Tell me what you found." Elena pulled out a slim tablet, its screen casting an eerie glow between them. Photos scrolled past, surveillance footage, financial records, phone logs that painted a picture Marcus wished he'd never seen. "Your friend Detective Morrison. He's been feeding them information for months. Bank deposits that coincide perfectly with every move the Serpents have made." The betrayal hit him like a physical blow. Morrison had been at Linda's funeral, had shaken his hand with what seemed like genuine sympathy. They'd shared beers after particularly brutal cases, had trusted each other with secrets that could end careers. "How long have you known?" "I suspected after the raid last month, confirmed it tonight when I traced the money." Elena's voice carried no satisfaction, only grim determination. "But Morrison's small time compared to what's really happening here. The people I work for, the ones who sent me to watch you, they're part of something bigger, something that makes the Serpents look like weekend warriors." Sarah stirred against his chest, making small sounds that threatened to become cries. Marcus rocked gently, muscle memory from countless midnight feedings taking over. "What do they want with me? With her?" Elena was quiet for a long moment, her fingers dancing across the tablet's surface. When she looked up, her expression held something Marcus had never seen there before: uncertainty. The night Linda died, you told me you were the only one who could prove what really happened at the docks. The shipment that went missing, the money that disappeared. That's right. What you don't know is that shipment wasn't drugs. It was weapons. Military-grade hardware that was supposed to disappear into official channels, get written off as damaged goods. Instead, it ended up funding something much worse. Elena leaned closer, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Linda found out. She was going to expose the whole network. The world seemed to tilt sideways. Marcus felt the breath leave his lungs as if he'd been sucker-punched. Linda hadn't been in the wrong place at the wrong time. She'd been murdered because she'd gotten too close to the truth. You're saying she was killed to keep her quiet? I'm saying she was killed because she was brave enough to do what others wouldn't. And now they think you know what she knew. Elena's hand found his shoulder, her touch surprisingly warm. The question is, do you? Marcus closed his eyes, pieces of half-remembered conversations clicking into place. Linda's late nights at the precinct, her growing distraction in the weeks before Sarah's birth. The way she'd started asking careful questions about his club connections, about people who might be trustworthy if something happened to her. She left something, he said slowly. A safety deposit box. She made me promise to check it if anything ever happened to her, but after the funeral he swallowed hard. I couldn't face it. Where? First National on Broad Street. But Elena, if these people are as connected as you say, they are, which means we have maybe 6 hours before they figure out where you've gone, trace your movements, start checking banks. Elena stood, her movement sharp with purpose. We get to that box, find out what Linda died protecting, and then we disappear. All three of us. Why are you helping me? Your people, they won't just let you walk away. Elena looked down at Sarah's sleeping form, something indefinable shifting in her expression. Some things are more important than orders. Your wife understood that. She died for it. Her voice hardened with resolve. Maybe it's time someone lived for it instead. Outside, a siren wailed in the distance, growing closer. Elena was already moving toward a rear exit, a hand extended back toward Marcus. Time to go. Sarah's future depends on what we do in the next few hours. The hospital corridor stretched endlessly before Marcus, each fluorescent light overhead casting harsh shadows that seemed to mock his desperation. His boots echoed against polished linoleum as he clutched Emma against his chest, her tiny fist wrapped around his leather jacket zipper. She'd been fussy all morning, as if sensing the danger that circled them like vultures. Dr. Sarah Chen emerged from the pediatric wing, her expression brightening when she spotted them. "Marcus, I wasn't expecting you today. Is everything all right with Emma?" He forced a smile, though his eyes remained vigilant, scanning the hallway behind her. "Just wanted to make sure she's developing okay. Been worried about her sleeping patterns." Sarah's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing genuine concern. "You look exhausted. Have you been getting any rest yourself?" Before Marcus could answer, a familiar voice cut through the ambient hospital noise like a blade. What a touching scene. Vincent Corelli stepped out from behind a pillar, his expensive suit incongruous against the sterile medical environment. Two men flanked him, not the usual muscle Marcus expected, but clean-cut types who could easily pass for concerned relatives or hospital administrators. Marcus's blood turned to ice. His hand instinctively moved toward the concealed weapon beneath his jacket, but Emma's presence stopped him cold. Too many civilians, too much risk. "Dr. Chen," Vincent said smoothly, "would you mind giving us a moment? Family matters to discuss." Sarah looked between the men, her medical training making her acutely aware of tension. "Marcus, is everything?" "It's fine," Marcus said quickly, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "Could you take Emma to the nursery for a few minutes? Check her vitals?" Sarah hesitated, then gently took the baby. Emma began to cry as she was separated from her father, the sound cutting through Marcus like shrapnel. As soon as Sarah disappeared around the corner, Vincent's pleasant facade evaporated. "You've been very difficult to find, Marcus. Moving around like a ghost. Very impressive for someone carrying so much Baggage. What do you want, Vincent? Justice. Resolution. The same things any businessman wants when someone steals from him. Vincent stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. Liam thought he was clever, skimming from our operations, building his little nest egg for domestic bliss. Marcus felt the familiar rage building, the same fury that had consumed him the night Liam died. My brother never stole from you. Though, Vincent pulled out his phone, showing Marcus a series of photographs, bank deposits, meeting locations, timestamps that painted a damning picture, 50,000 over 6 months. Did you really think we wouldn't notice? The images blurred before Marcus's eyes. Either Vincent was lying, or Liam had been living a double life Marcus never suspected. The brother he'd killed to protect had been guilty after all. I can see the wheels turning, Vincent continued, the doubt creeping in. Makes you wonder what else your beloved brother kept from you, doesn't it? Even if that's true, Liam's dead. The debt died with him. Vincent's laugh was cold. Oh, Marcus, you still don't understand. This was never about money. Liam's theft was just the excuse. The real problem is what he knew about our operations, what he might have recorded, what he might have shared with his loving brother. The pieces clicked into place with horrible clarity. Vincent wasn't here for revenge, he was here for insurance. As long as Marcus lived, he remained a threat, someone who might know enough to bring down Vincent's entire organization. I don't know anything, Marcus said desperately. Maybe, but maybe isn't good enough anymore. Vincent nodded toward his men. You forced my hand by running, by making this personal, by making me look weak in front of my associates. Emma's cries echoed from the nursery down the hall, a sound that tore at Marcus's soul and reminded him exactly what he stood to lose. The baby's innocent, Marcus said. Innocent? Vincent's eyes glittered with malice. She's a loose end, living proof of connections that need to be severed cleanly. Marcus calculated distances, exit routes, possibilities. The hospital's security cameras would capture everything. Civilian casualties were inevitable. Emma was 50 feet away, protected only by a pediatric nurse who had no idea what danger she was in. I have a proposal, Vincent said, pulling a small device from his pocket. A tracker. You put this on, and we'll know where you are at all times. In exchange, the baby gets to grow up, maybe even gets adopted by a nice family who'll never know her father was a killer. The device looked innocent enough. Small, black, probably GPS-enabled. Wearing it meant surrendering any hope of freedom, of escape, of the future he'd dreamed of building with Emma. But it also meant she lived. Marcus reached for the tracker, his hand trembling slightly. In the distance, Emma's cries grew louder, as if she somehow knew her fate was being decided by men who dealt in violence and compromise. The choice was no choice at all. The sound of shattering glass echoed through the house as Marcus dove behind the kitchen counter, clutching Emma against his chest. Bullets splintered the wooden cabinets above his head, sending fragments raining down on them both. The baby's cries pierced through the chaos, but he couldn't risk moving to comfort her properly. Give me the child, Marcus, Diane's voice carried from somewhere near the front door, cold and commanding. This doesn't have to end badly for everyone. Marcus pressed his back against the cabinet, his mind racing. The burner phone Sarah had hidden, he'd found it just minutes before Diane arrived with her backup. The text messages revealed everything. Sarah hadn't been the innocent victim he'd believed. She'd been working with a rival cartel, feeding them information about Marcus's runs, his routes, his vulnerabilities. The accident that killed her hadn't been random at all. But Emma was still his daughter, still innocent in all of this. I know what you're thinking, Diane called out, her footsteps creaking across the hardwood floor. Sarah betrayed you, used you. But that baby carries her blood, Marcus. Do you really think you can trust her? Another volley of gunfire erupted, this time from the living room. Marcus realized with growing dread that they had him surrounded. He counted at least 3 different positions. Diane at the front, someone by the sliding door to the deck, and another voice he couldn't place coming from upstairs. Emma's cries intensified, and Marcus felt his chest tighten with panic. He couldn't let her suffer for the sins of adults. Whatever Sarah had done, whatever web of lies she'd woven around their marriage, Emma deserved a chance at life. The USB drive, Marcus. Diane's voice was closer now, maybe 15 feet away. Sarah hid shipping manifests on it, names, dates, quantities, information that could destroy a lot of important people, including me. Marcus closed his eyes, remembering Sarah's final moments in the hospital. Her whispered words about keeping Emma safe, about the truth being hidden where only he would think to look. He'd assumed she meant the baby book, but the USB drive had been taped inside Emma's favorite stuffed elephant, the one Sarah had insisted on buying before she was even born. "I don't know what you're talking about," he called back, shifting Emma to one arm while reaching for the pistol tucked in his waistband. "Don't insult my intelligence." Diane's laugh was sharp, brittle. Sarah was sloppy, greedy. She thought she could play both sides and come out ahead, but she underestimated how far we'd go to protect our operations. The realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. You killed her. The crash was unfortunate. We'd hoped to retrieve the information quietly, but Sarah panicked when she realized we were onto her. Started making threats about going to the FBI. There was a pause then. She really thought you'd protect her, even after everything she'd done to you. Marcus felt rage building in his chest, hot and consuming. Sarah had put their daughter in danger, had brought this violence into their home, but she'd also died trying to make things right, hadn't she? The text messages showed her trying to back out of the deal in her final weeks, scared about what would happen to Emma if things went wrong. "Time's up, Marcus." Diane's voice was directly on the other side of the counter now. "Last chance to do this the easy way." Marcus made his choice. In one fluid motion, he rolled away from the counter, firing 3 quick shots toward Diane's position while sprinting for the back stairs. Emma screamed as they moved, but he couldn't stop to comfort her. Heavy footsteps thundered behind them as he took the stairs 2 at a time. His bedroom door was already open. Someone had been searching up here. Marcus slammed it shut and engaged the lock, knowing it would only buy him seconds. The window led to the roof over the garage, dangerous with a baby but their only option. "Marcus!" The door shuddered under the impact of someone's shoulder. "There's nowhere to run. We have people watching every road out of town." He tucked Emma inside his leather jacket, zipping it carefully to keep her secure but able to breathe. The window lock was stiff, corroded from years of paint and weather. Behind him, the door frame began to splinter. "I'm sorry, sweetheart," he whispered to Emma as he finally got the window open. "Daddy's going to keep you safe. I promise." The door burst open, just as Marcus swung his leg over the windowsill. Diane stood in the doorway, gun drawn, her face twisted with frustration and cold determination. "Step back inside, Marcus. Now." He looked at his daughter's tiny face, peaceful now despite the chaos around them, and made the only choice a father could make. "Go to hell," he said, and dropped into the night. The morning sun cast long shadows across the farmhouse porch as Jake finished loading the last of Emma's things into the truck. 6 months of sleepless nights, formula bottles and desperate prayers had led to this moment. The baby carrier sat securely in the back seat, Emma sleeping peacefully, unaware that her entire world was about to change again. Marcus hadn't returned since their confrontation 3 days ago. Jake had spent those 72 hours checking locks, cleaning weapons, and making final preparations. The silence felt more ominous than any threat Marcus could have voiced. Jake's phone buzzed. "Detective Rivera." "Found something you need to see," she said without preamble. "Marcus Walsh. That's not his real name. He's David Brennan, Sarah's cousin. Been in and out of psychiatric facilities for the past decade." The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. Sarah had mentioned a cousin who'd struggled with mental illness, someone the family had lost touch with years ago. Jake's hands tightened on the steering wheel as Rivera continued. "There's more. He was obsessed with Sarah, had restraining orders filed against him twice. Hospital records show he was released from a facility in Montana 2 weeks before he showed up at your place. Where is he now?" "That's the problem. He checked out of his motel yesterday. Jake, this guy isn't just dangerous. He's delusional. His medical files indicate he believed Sarah was going to leave you for him. Jake ended the call and pulled onto the highway. In the rearview mirror, Emma stirred but didn't wake. He'd promised Sarah he'd keep their daughter safe, no matter what it cost him. The weight of that promise had never felt heavier. 50 miles later, Jake noticed the black sedan in his mirrors. It maintained a careful distance, but the pattern was unmistakable. Marcus had found them. Jake's mind raced through options. The police were too far away, and leading Marcus to Sarah's sister's house would only endanger more innocent people. He needed to end this here, on his terms. The old quarry road appeared on his right, a dead end he knew well from his teenage years. Jake made the turn, watching the sedan follow. Emma began to fuss in her carrier, sensing the tension that filled the truck like smoke. "It's okay, baby girl," Jake whispered. "Daddy's going to fix this." The quarry opened up before them, a vast crater filled with dark water. Jake parked near the edge and stepped out, leaving Emma in the truck with the engine running and doors locked. The sedan pulled up 20 yards away. Marcus emerged slowly, and Jake was shocked by his appearance. The man who'd seemed so composed and helpful now looked haggard, wild-eyed. His clothes were wrinkled, his face gaunt with sleepless obsession. "You killed her," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the empty space between them. "Sarah would still be alive if she'd never met you. Sarah died in childbirth, Marcus. David, whatever your name is, it wasn't anyone's fault." "She was trying to leave you," Marcus screamed, spittle flying from his lips. "She called me that night, said she was scared, said you were drinking again and getting violent." Jake felt the words hit him like physical blows. "That's not true. Sarah never. She loved me. We were happy." "Happy?" Marcus laughed bitterly. She was terrified, planning to take the baby and run. "But you couldn't let that happen, could you?" The accusation hung in the air like poison. Jake realized that Marcus had constructed an entire fantasy around Sarah's death, one where Jake was the villain and Marcus was meant to be the savior. The medical examiner's report, the witnesses at the hospital, the obvious reality of complications during delivery, none of it mattered to a mind this fractured. "She's gone, Marcus. Nothing we do here will bring her back." "But Emma's still alive." Marcus's hand moved to something behind his back. "Sarah's daughter deserves better than a murderer for a father." The knife gleamed in the morning sun as Marcus raised it. Jake had faced violence before, in bars and on dark roads, but never with so much at stake. Behind him, Emma began to cry, the sound piercing and urgent. "You want to talk about what Emma deserves?" Jake's voice turned deadly calm. "She deserves to grow up knowing her mother died bringing her into this world out of love, not because of some sick fantasy you've created." Marcus charged forward with a howl of rage. Jake sidestepped and caught his wrist, the two men grappling at the quarry's edge, loose stones scattered beneath their feet as they fought for control of the blade. The knife arced toward Jake's chest. He twisted away, and Marcus's momentum carried him forward. For a moment, he teetered on the precipice, eyes wide with sudden understanding. Then gravity claimed him, and he plummeted into the dark water below. Jake stood at the edge, breathing hard, watching the ripples spread across the quarry's surface. Emma's cries called him back to what mattered. He walked to the truck, lifted his daughter from her carrier, and held her close. "It's over, sweetheart," he whispered. "We're going home."